In a quiet forest, a boy found a pool where the trees shimmered like gold, and the reflection didn't match the sky. Welcome to Haze and Hue. Settle in while I paint and share a quiet story from deep within the forest. Rowan didn't know why he turned off the trail that day. It was a path he walked often, a winding thread through the woods behind his home, where sun slanted through the trees and the breeze carried that soft, leafy hush he loved. He liked the rhythm of it, the moss beneath his shoes, the low creak of burrows overhead, the quiet he could slip into like an old jumper. But something shifted. He couldn't have said what it was, a sound too soft to name, a hush that deepened mid-step, a pull in his chest like the forest had just thought of something he had forgotten to tell him. Whatever it was, he paused at a fork in the path he didn't remember being there before. To the right, the usual way. To the left, a slope he was almost sure had never been there. The trees leaned more closely together, the light below more golden, but still. Rowan turned left. The path led him gently downward. The air cooled as the canopy thickened, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt waiting. He followed it slowly, ducking beneath low branches and stepping over long roots, moving like someone who knew not to speak too loudly in a place where something sacred might be sleeping. And then he saw it, a small pool, cradled in a hollow between the trees. It lay so still it may not even have been water at all, but glass set into the earth. No ripples, no insects skating across it, just a perfect oval of silence. Rowan stepped closer. He crouched at the edge and peered in, expecting maybe to see his own reflection or the sky above. But the image staring back wasn't the trees behind him, or even the forest around him. The trees in the water were taller, their leaves shimmered, their bark looked smooth and pale like stone washed in moonlight. It wasn't a mirror, it was a window. Rowan didn't gasp, he didn't speak. He just watched, like the hush inside him had finally found its match in the world. The reflection didn't move, it didn't shimmer with the breeze, it simply remained. He reached out, his fingers hovered just above the surface, and then he touched it. The water did not feel like water, it wasn't cold, it didn't ripple. It met his skin like warmth, like something remembering him. It just remained, a world beneath the surface, perfectly still, waiting. Rowan stared at it for a long time. The forest shown in the water wasn't a mirror of the one he stood in. The trees were different, taller, more graceful. Their bark shimmered faintly, pale and smooth like stone touched by moonlight. The leaves didn't rustle, they glowed softly, like they held their own light deep inside. The sky, if there was one, was filled with golden mist, not clouds, the kind of light that you'd normally see only for a few seconds at dawn, stretched out as if it had no end. There was a hush in that world, a deeper quiet than the one surrounding him now. It wasn't heavy, it was peaceful, like every sound had already happened and was now resting gently in the air. Rowan crouched beside the pool, resting his arms on his knees, eyes fixed on the scene below. The longer he looked, the more it felt like something inside him was turning towards it. Not curiosity exactly, more like a memory leaning forward to listen. He leaned a little closer, just enough to see if the image would shift. It didn't. There was no sound, not even birds in the trees behind him now. The forest was completely still. He reached out slowly and let his fingertips brush the surface. Warm, not like bath water, not like the sunlit stone he sat on earlier. It was the kind of warmth that didn't come from the temperature. It came from welcome, from recognition. He pulled his hand back. The water left no trace. His fingers were dry. The surface hadn't changed. He looked again into the pool. The reflection held steady. A breeze moved behind him, brushing the back of his neck, but the pool remained undisturbed. Whatever wind touched this world didn't reach the one below. Rowan stood. For a moment, he thought about leaving, turning around, retracing the path through the trees, but the forest behind him had already gone silent. The light that had led him here was gone, and there was nothing in him that wanted to go back. He looked down at the water once more. Then he stepped forward, not into the pool, not yet, but closer. At the edge he knelt again, watched the reflection, then leaned forward and placed his palm flat on the surface. His hand passed through. There was no resistance, no ripple, just that soft, warm hush. He pressed further. His arm disappeared up to the elbow. It didn't feel like water. It didn't feel like anything at all, except the sense of being allowed in. He took a deep breath, not out of fear, but in preparation, and pulled his arm back. Still dry, still silent. He stood again, then sat. For a while, he did nothing at all. He just breathed. The pool didn't move. The forest didn't ask him to decide. Time, it seemed, had paused politely nearby. A dragonfly passed overhead. Its wings clicked faintly in the air. Then it was gone. Rowan lay back on the moss and closed his eyes. And in that moment, he remembered something. Not clearly, not like a photo or a word, but a feeling. At night, long ago, when he was very small, and the world felt big and quiet and full of something he couldn't name. He remembered sitting in the back seat of a car, watching trees pass in the dark, and feeling like something was watching back. Not frightening, but curious. That memory returned to him now, tucked inside the hush of this hollow. When he sat up again, the forest had not changed. The pool still shimmered faintly, showing that impossible golden world beneath. And Rowan knew he wasn't meant to stay on this side. He stood for the third time, walked to the edge. This time he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, first one foot, then the other. The surface of the water welcomed him with complete silence. No splash, no cold, no resistance. The world above didn't distort. It simply slipped behind him. He felt it first in his knees, then his hips, then his chest. Not pressure, not sinking, just a soft folding of air around him. When the water reached his shoulders, he paused, not from fear, but from awe. There was light coming from below, soft and golden and endless, and then he stepped fully through. The light welcomed him. It wasn't blinding, not like sunlight, and it wasn't sharp like the beam of a torch. It was everywhere, soft, golden, woven into the leaves and the air and the ground beneath his feet. Rowan took a breath, though he hadn't noticed he'd stopped breathing, and the light filled his chest like warmth. He was standing, not swimming or floating. His shoes rested on something solid, though it didn't feel like stone or earth. It felt like stillness made real, like standing on the pause between one note of a song and the next. The world around him stretched in every direction, trees taller than anything he'd ever seen, their trunks smooth and pale like silver driftwood. The leaves shimmered with soft golds and coppers and faint green light, though there was no clear sun above him, just brightness, diffused and endless, like dawn caught in place. The air smelled like honey and river water and something green he couldn't name. Rowan turned slowly, trying not to make a sound. The pool behind him, the one he'd stepped through, had vanished. There was no water, no hollow, no edge, just forest. It was as if this place had always been here, and he had always been in it. He didn't feel afraid, he felt seen. The quiet was deep, but not empty. There were sounds here, though he couldn't find their source. A soft hum, a rhythm of breath or wind that came from the trees themselves. Leaves moved without touching. Branches swayed lightly, though there was no breeze. He took a step forward. The ground beneath him gave slightly, like moss. It glowed faintly where his feet pressed down, a soft amber trace that faded slowly behind him. He paused, then took another step. The glow returned, just a hint, as if the forest remembered him. He walked slowly, each footfall a question, each moment unfolding like a page turned without hurry. There were no paths, but the forest opened gently as he moved, like he was making space. Here the air thickened with scent, warm bark, crushed leaves, the memory of rain. Tiny glowing spores floated lazily in the air, drifting past like dandelion seeds made of light. He reached towards one, passed through his fingers with no weight at all. Birds called in the distance, not loudly, but with notes he'd never heard before. Clear, low, drawn-out sounds that echoed a little and then fell still. He saw a branch sway. Something moved there. Not an animal, not exactly. It looked like a creature made of folded leaves and light, perched on a branch like he had always belonged there. It turned its head toward him, if he had a head, then melted backwards into the trunk of the tree without sound. Rowan blinked. There were no footprints, no broken twigs, only possibility. He walked on. He didn't know how long he moved like that, quietly, curiously, watching everything. Time felt different here. It didn't pass, it pulled. Eventually, he came to a small rise where the trees parted slightly and a wide patch of golden ferns stretched out beneath him. They moved in ripples, though no wind stirred them. The motion started near the middle and moved outward, like the forest was breathing in slow concentric circles. Rowan crouched at the edge of the rise and watched. After a few moments, the motion stopped. The stillness returned. But it wasn't the same stillness as before. This stillness felt attentive, like the forest was waiting for something, not impatiently, but gently, like a parent waiting for a child to find their own way. He didn't move, not yet. He looked at his hands. They looked the same, pale from the soft light, but unchanged. Still him. But inside, something had already begun to shift. He didn't know what. He just knew the silence felt familiar now. He stood again and stepped carefully down into the fern-filled clearing. The ground here was warmer. Each step released a faint light beneath his shoes. Not a glow, but a pulse, like the forest was reading his presence and answering in return. Halfway across the clearing, he paused. There was something ahead. At first, it looked like stone, but as he approached, he realized it wasn't. It was a structure, very small, no taller than his waist, made of the same smooth silver material as the tree trunks, but shaped into an arch, like a doorway, half buried in the earth. Rowan stepped toward it. There were markings on the arch, not words, not symbols, just grooves, shallow, fluid, curling into each other like rivers or wind. He reached out, gently brushing a finger across the pattern. The groove lit softly where he touched. The light followed his hand. Then, as he pulled back, it faded. He felt something in his chest, not a sound, not a voice, just a quiet hum, like a thought that didn't belong to him, but meant for him to feel. He placed both palms on the arch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air around him thickened slightly, and a warm pulse moved through the ground beneath his feet. He didn't move. A shape shimmered into view above the arch, a circle made of woven light. Within it, he saw a brief image. A tree, unlike the others, with long cascading branches and a hollow in its base. The image held for a second, then vanished. Rowan stood very still. The silence settled again. But something in him was different now. The forest was not just alive, it was aware, and it had given him something. Not an instruction, not a destination, just a whisper of a place. He turned from the arch and looked up through the trees. Somewhere out there was the tree he had seen, and whether he understood it or not, he was meant to find it. Rowan walked with soft steps, tracing a path through the fern-covered clearing. Behind him, the silver arch stood silent and still, its soft glow faded into memory. Before him stretched more of the golden forest, tall, listening trees and leaves that shimmered faintly, even in shadow. There were no signs to follow, no trail, no compass, just the image that had flickered in the air. The tree with the hollow at its base, its long branches falling like curtains. He didn't know where it was or how far, only that he was meant to find it. The ground shifted gently beneath his feet. Some patches were soft and sponge-like, others smooth and cool, like walking on living stone. As he moved, the light in the forest seemed to change with him. It filtered through the canopy in slow-moving shafts, casting long, slow-drifting shadows. They didn't dance like sunlight through leaves. They floated like underwater light. After a while, Rowan noticed that the air had grown heavier, not with heat, but with presence. There was no fear in it, but he could feel the world watching him. Loosely, like a hand held just above the shoulder, every step he took seemed to stir something just out of view. He passed a tree that pulsed faintly when he drew close, the rings on its bark glowing like ripples in a pond. Another tree had broad, flat leaves that curled inward when he reached out a hand, hiding their golden undersides. Small spores lifted into the air behind him, drifting like lazy stars, never brushing his skin, but always present. He came to a bend in the slope where the land rose slightly, the trees growing further apart, their trunks so pale they were nearly white. They stood like pillars holding up a ceiling of gold and silence. Between them, thin vines hang straight down, unmoving, each one ending in a tiny light that flickered not like fire, but like thought, quiet, irregular, responsive. Rowan touched one of the vines with the back of his hand. It didn't react at first, but then, gently, the light at its tip grew brighter, glowing softly for a moment, before dimming again. A few of the other vines shimmered in turn, one after the other, like a small breath passing through the canopy. He moved on, more slowly now. There were sounds in this part of the forest, faint clicks, soft hums, the distant creak of shifting wood, but no wind. Everything moved, but not because anything pushed it. It was as if the trees and light and leaves moved on their own time, following patterns he couldn't see. Then he saw it, not the tree, not yet, a figure. It stood between two trunks, just far enough away to be half obscured. It was small, shorter than Rowan, and its shape was soft, like it was made of folded light. It had no face, no arms, no clear outline, just a quiet presence. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, but he felt it watching him. Rowan froze, unsure if he should speak. The figure tilted slightly to one side, not menacing, not curious, just present. He took a step forward. The figure turned, not walking, not shifting, but changing direction like smoke pulled sideways. Then it slipped behind the tree and was gone. He waited a long moment before walking on. There was no path, no footprints, no way to know if the figure had been real or something the forest showed him. Not to warn, not to test, but to acknowledge. Eventually, the trees began to change again. They grew thinner but denser. The forest floor narrowed into a sort of corridor, with tall grasses brushing his legs and long strands of light falling from high above like hanging threads. The hum of the forest was louder here, not in volume, but in texture. He could feel it in his teeth, the soft skin of his wrists, like the whole place was vibrating at a pitch he almost understood. He passed a cluster of stones arranged in a spiral. They weren't sharp or carved, just smooth and quiet, and each one gave off a faint warmth as he passed. At the center of the spiral stood a narrow stump, and from it grew a single strand of something that wasn't wood and wasn't light, something in between. It bent slightly in his direction as he moved past, as if acknowledging his presence, and then returning to its long, slow watch. After walking for what felt like both minutes and hours, Rowan entered another clearing. This one was darker. The trees here were closer, their branches interwoven tightly above, letting only a small golden mist seep through. The ground was uneven, with soft moss interrupted by flat, mirror-like stones arranged in irregular steps. The air was cooler, and the light that remained felt older somehow. He sat on one of the stones, letting his breath slow. His legs ached faintly, not from exhaustion, but from tension, like he had been holding something tight in his body without realizing it. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked around. The forest was still, no creatures, no vines, no whispers, just stillness. And then movement. It was small, barely there, but at the edge of the clearing, something shifted behind the trees. Not quickly, not threatening, just present. Another figure, this one taller and standing very, very still. Rowan didn't stand. He simply watched. The figure remained. Then slowly it turned, not its head, its whole shape, and disappeared between the trunks. Rowan sat for a while longer, unsure what to feel. Not fear, not quite, but the sense that he had entered a part of the forest that was more awake than the others. Eventually he rose and continued on. There were no directions, but the forest began to open again. The light returned, brighter now, pulling in soft golden puddles between the trees. He felt it on his skin, like warmth and weight at once, like hands guiding his shoulders without touching. The feeling of being watched didn't leave him, but it changed. It became gentler, more familiar, as if whatever lived in this forest, whatever made it breathe and shimmer and change, had decided he wasn't a stranger anymore. He came to a hill that sloped upward into a canopy of dense gold. At the top, he paused. Ahead, just beyond the ridge, something shimmered. The branches parted more widely there. He took one slow breath and stepped forward. The slope at the top of the ridge curved gently downward, revealing a quiet hollow lined with soft moss and low golden trees. It wasn't wide, but it felt like it had been waiting a long time. Not for him specifically, perhaps, but for someone like him. The air here was warmer, almost sleepy. Leaves barely stirred in their places, and the light glowed like an afternoon that never quite reached sunset. Rowan stepped carefully into the hollow. His footsteps didn't echo, didn't crunch, didn't even whisper. The ground welcomed him like he had known he would come. As he moved deeper in, the hush around him began to change. It wasn't silence anymore, not exactly. It was filled with tiny, delicate sounds that seemed to rise, not from a single place, but from everywhere at once. Faint notes like wind chimes in the distance, the soft creak of branches turning without wind, the hush of light bending. In the center of the hollow stood a tree. It wasn't the tree from the vision, not the one with the cascading branches and the hollow at its base, but it was close. The shape was similar, and there was something about his presence that made his chest ache, just slightly, in a way he couldn't explain. It felt familiar, not from a dream, not from a place he'd visited before, but like remembering something from someone else's life, something you'd even forgotten. He approached slowly. The bark of the tree was smooth and almost translucent, like sunlight caught behind parchment. Long strands of golden thread draped from his lower branches, swaying in movements that didn't match his own. He reached forward and let it fall across his fingers. It was warm, not just to the touch. He felt emotionally warm, like the way a blanket feels when someone tucks it around you gently, without speaking. When he let go, the thread didn't fall away. It stayed against his hand for a moment, as though reluctant to leave. Rowan looked up. Above him, the canopy opened slightly, allowing more of the golden light to fall onto the trunk of the tree. The glow here was stronger than in any other part of the forest he'd seen so far. It wasn't bright, but it was deep, like the light had soaked into every surface, patient and kind. He sat beneath the tree. The moss here was soft and dry and smelled faintly of something floral and old, like pressed flowers kept between the pages of a book. He leaned back against the bark. It was warm and smooth and pulsed very faintly, like it had a slow, ancient heartbeat. He closed his eyes, and when he did, a memory came, only it wasn't his. He saw, not clearly, but vividly, a child standing beneath this very tree. The child's hair was darker than his, their face not fully formed in his mind, but the sense of them was strong. They were quiet, like him. Still, the same forest surrounded them, though the colors felt slightly different, less gold, more soft green. The child reached out and touched the bark of the tree, and the tree bent toward them, just slightly. That was all. The memory faded. Rowan opened his eyes. The forest hadn't changed. The light still moved slowly through the trees. The air still hummed with faint, drifting notes. But his heart was beating faster. He hadn't seen anything like that before, not in dreams, not in stories. It hadn't felt imagined. It had felt shared. He stood and placed a hand on the bark. It was still warm, still pulsing faintly. "Was that you?" he whispered. No answer came. But a breeze moved through the clearing, just one soft push of air, ruffling his hair and brushing against his cheek like a nod. He stood there a moment longer, unsure of what he was meant to do. Then he noticed something just beyond the tree, a small archway of twisted roots, partially buried in the moss. It wasn't large, just enough space for a person to pass through if they ducked. Rowan stepped closer. Beyond it, the trees changed again, thicker, darker, clustered like they were hiding something behind them. He crouched and moved under the root archway. Immediately the air shifted, cooler, denser. He could feel the forest watching again, not in fear, but with attention. The ground here was layered with golden leaves, soft and undisturbed. No footprints, no broken stems, nothing that suggests anything had walked this way for a long time. He moved slowly, listening. With every few steps, a new sound emerged, a soft crackle underfoot, the distant knock of a wood on wood, the faint whistle of something high above. Then he heard it, a voice, not speaking, not calling, just a note, held for a few seconds, rising and then falling, like a bird's call that had forgotten it was meant to be a song. He paused and turned toward the sound. There was nothing there, just trees. But the note came again, this time closer. He stepped forward slowly. The trees began to part, and in the space that opened, he saw a second tree, taller than the others, darker too. Its branches curved outward like reaching arms, and a long hollow opened at its base, just wide enough for someone to sit inside. This was the tree from the vision. Rowan felt it instantly. The air around it was charged, not with electricity, but with emotion, quiet, weighty, old. He moved closer. The hollow at the base wasn't deep, but it was shadowed. He crouched in front of it and placed a hand on the edge. The bark was different here, not smooth, but textured, like stone worn by centuries of rain. He stepped into the hollow and sat down. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath all day. He leaned back. The interior of the tree was cool and dry. From within, he could see the clearing beyond, framed by the curve of the trunk. And then something shifted. The clearing outside flickered, not a change in light, a change in time. For just a moment, Rowan wasn't sitting inside the tree. He was watching someone else there. A person, not quite older than him, not quite younger, sat in the hollow, eyes closed, hands resting in their lap. Their features were blurred, their clothes unfamiliar, but their stillness was perfect, and Rowan could feel what they felt. Not fear, not wonder, a deep, soft sadness, like remembering a friend's name just after they've walked away. Then the image faded. The forest returned. Rowan sat alone again, but he didn't feel alone. He placed his hand on the inner wall of the hollow and closed his eyes. "I remember you," he whispered, even if he didn't, even if the memory wasn't his. Something inside him did, and that was enough. Rowan stood still beneath the roots of the hollow, his breath quiet in his chest. Golden light seeped from the arching ceiling above, dimming just enough for the soft glow of the forest floor to shine through. Not bright, but steady. The hush here was deeper than silence. It pulsed like something living, like something listening. He turned slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the richness of the world around him. This place, the mirrorless forest, felt like a memory made real, as though he'd stepped not into another world, but into the space between thought and dream. Every vine, every soft glowing leaf seemed to breathe in time with something ancient and kind. He stepped forward. There was no path, but there didn't need to be. Wherever he placed his feet, the earth welcomed him, moss yielding, roots parting just enough. As he moved, small golden lights stirred around him. They weren't fireflies, though they drifted like them. They shimmered like flecks of light caught in water, then disappeared into the stillness again. He passed trees that hummed faintly when he drew close. They were tall and pale, with bark like smooth stone and leaves that glowed from within. Their branches arched overhead like outstretched arms, forming cathedral vaults woven from silence. At the center of one vast clearing stood a tree unlike the others. It wasn't the tallest or the widest, but it felt like the heart of the forest. Its trunk gleamed with threads of gold that spiraled upward, vanishing into its canopy of glowing leaves. Its roots were partly exposed, looping above the earth in soft curves, and in their cradle sat a pool, not mirrored like the one above, but warm and lit from within. The water pulsed gently with light, each wave rising and fading like breath. Rowan approached slowly. He knelt beside the pool and looked into it, expecting perhaps to see another reflection, another glimpse into something beyond. But this water didn't show anything. It wasn't meant to. It wasn't a mirror. It was a feeling. And as he stared into it, he felt something stir in himself. A flicker of something he hadn't known he'd been carrying. Not sorrow, not fear, but something older, a quiet ache. He reached a hand toward the pool, and before his fingers touched the surface, a ripple rose to meet him, not water, but light. The moment his hand entered it, the ripple passed through him, and the hush deepened. In that instant, Rowan was still, not frozen, not trapped, just still, like a stone settled on the riverbed, like light held in amber. He saw nothing, he heard nothing, and yet he understood. The forest was not showing him secrets. It was sharing something he had always known, something he had always known too, deep down, like a memory buried beneath waking. that stillness lived inside him. It always had. This place, this golden rush, was not a destination. It was a part of him that had been waiting to be remembered, and now that it had, it would never leave. The tree paused once more, and the ripple passed. Rowan blinked. The world returned slowly. Soft light, warm air, the rustle of glowing leaves far overhead. He sat back, breath easing. He felt full, not of answers, but of quiet. He didn't know how long he remained there. Time didn't pass the same way here. Minutes folded into moments, and eventually, when he rose to his feet, he did so without effort. The forest lifted with him. He turned back the way he'd come, through no path marked his return. He no longer needed one. The forest opened as he walked, light shifting gently, vines drifting aside, moss soft underfoot. When he reached the mirrored pool again, the one through which he had entered, it was calm. The golden trees reflected on its surface, and beyond them, the sky of the world he left shimmered faintly. Rowan stepped to its edge. He didn't step through yet. Instead, he stood there a while, watching. A breeze passed behind him, rustling the golden canopy above. It wasn't a push. It wasn't a sign. It was just the forest breathing, and Rowan breathed with it. He looked into the water once more, and saw not just a reflection, but a moment. Himself sitting by the pool in the world above, before he'd stepped in, eyes wide, shoulders slightly hunched, waiting. He smiled and stepped forward. The surface met him like warmth, and then he was rising, not swimming, not climbing, just moving gently, as though carried by the hush itself. When he blinked again, he was standing on the forest floor above, the world he had known before. The moss beneath him was soft. The pool at his feet mirrored the sky now, not the forest below. The light through the trees was late afternoon gold, the kind that stretches long shadows across the roots. Somewhere a bird called. Everything was the same, and nothing was. He walked back along the paths he knew. The hush moved with him, not as sound, not as memory, but as quiet undercurrent. Each footstep felt rooted, each breath deeper. The forest no longer felt like a place to enter or leave. It simply was, and he was part of it now. When he reached the edge of the woods just before the trees gave way to the fields beyond, he paused. He turned once more to look behind him. The forest stood quiet, golden light stretching long through the trunks. He didn't know if he would speak of what he'd seen. He didn't need to. The forest had given him no task, no quest, no riddle to solve, only a space to listen, a space to remember. He stepped from the trees and followed the worn track toward home. His house would be waiting. the creak of the floorboards, the drawer with his collections, feathers, beads, stones, the bed by the window, the bird song in the morning. And now this stillness will live in those things too. The hush will rise again in quiet moments, in dreams, in the flicker of candlelight against the wall. It will never truly leave. And when the world felt too loud again, when days grew heavy and time pressed in close, he would remember the pool, the reflection, the step beneath, the golden tree that hummed with memory, and in that remembering he would return, not by stepping through, but by being still. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with me. If you enjoyed the painting or the story, I'd love to have you join me again. And if you have any watercolor tips, I'm still learning. I'd really love to hear them in the comments. Thank you.